The fluorescent lights of Building 21C cast harsh shadows across Lieutenant Sarah Chen's face as she stood at attention, her uniform crisp despite the sweat beading on her forehead. The room buzzed with the quiet hum of servers and the occasional click of keyboards, but all she could hear was the thundering of her own heartbeat as Colonel Marcus Bradley's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Lieutenant Chen, your code is not just inadequate, it's dangerous," Bradley's words echoed off the concrete walls of the Cyber Warfare Division. "You've wasted 3 months of this team's time with your amateur programming attempts, and frankly, I'm questioning whether you belong in this unit at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Sarah's hands trembled slightly at her sides, but she kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. Around her, the other members of the 24th Cyber Operations Squadron shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, some avoiding eye contact, while others watched with a mixture of pity and relief that they weren't in her position. The humiliation burned through her chest like acid, but she forced herself to remain silent as Bradley continued his public dressing down. "Your satellite communication protocol has more holes than Swiss cheese," Bradley continued, pacing back and forth in front of the massive wall of monitors that displayed global military communications networks. "Any first-year computer science student could write better code than this garbage you've submitted. I've seen high school programming projects with more sophistication." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She had spent countless hours in her cramped barrack room, hunched over her laptop, writing and rewriting the code that was supposed to create a new encrypted communication channel for high-priority military aircraft. The protocol was designed to provide an additional layer of security for Air Force One and other critical assets, ensuring that even if primary communications were compromised, there would always be a backup channel that remained secure. But according to Bradley, her work was worthless. Furthermore, Bradley's voice rose, ensuring that everyone in the 40-person cyber unit could hear every word, "your inability to meet basic military standards reflects poorly on this entire division. When General Morrison reviews our quarterly reports, what am I supposed to tell him about your contribution? That we're carrying dead weight?" Sarah felt her face flush with shame and anger. She had graduated summa cum laude from MIT with dual degrees in computer science and electrical engineering. She had scored in the top 1% of her Air Force officer candidate school class. She had chosen the military over lucrative offers from tech giants like Google and Apple because she wanted to serve her country, to use her skills for something greater than corporate profits. And now she was being told she wasn't good enough. The other officers in the room, mostly men in their 30s and 40s who had been coding for military systems before Sarah was born, watched the spectacle unfold. Some looked genuinely sympathetic, understanding that everyone made mistakes and that public humiliation wasn't the military way of handling performance issues. Others seemed to enjoy the show, perhaps threatened by the young woman who had arrived with impressive credentials and fresh ideas that challenged their established methods. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who sat 2 rows behind Sarah, had been one of the few people to show her any kindness since her arrival at Peterson Space Base 6 months ago. He had helped her navigate the complex bureaucracy of military IT systems and had even offered to review her code before submission. But even he couldn't meet her eyes now as Bradley continued his tirade. "I want everyone in this room to understand something," Bradley said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone as he gestured towards Sarah. "Cyber warfare is not a place for learning on the job. Our enemies don't give participation trophies. When you write code that's supposed to protect our nation's most critical assets, there is no room for error, no margin for incompetence." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that he was using her as a teaching moment, while simultaneously destroying her confidence and reputation within the unit. She wondered if this was how he had built his own career, by tearing down others to make himself look stronger and more competent in comparison. "Your code will be scrapped," Bradley announced with finality. "Sergeant Williams will be taking over the project, and I expect a working protocol within 2 weeks. As for you, Lieutenant Chen,
You'll be reassigned to data entry and basic network maintenance until you can prove you're capable of handling real responsibilities. The demotion was devastating. Data entry was the kind of work assigned to new recruits or officers who had fallen out of favor. It meant no more high-level projects, no more opportunities to contribute to critical national security initiatives, and effectively, no chance of advancement within the cyber operations field. As Bradley dismissed the meeting, Sarah remained at attention until he had left the room, followed by most of the other officers who avoided looking at her as they filed out. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the persistent hum of the servers that would continue their work long after this moment of human drama had passed. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached her cautiously, his expression showing genuine concern. "Ma'am, I'm sorry about what just happened. That wasn't right." Sarah finally allowed herself to relax her posture slightly, though she still felt exposed and vulnerable under the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Thank you, Sergeant," she managed to say, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside. What she didn't know was that in less than 72 hours, her worthless code would become the only thing standing between Air Force One and a cyber attack that would change the course of military communications forever.
Sarah's new workspace was a windowless basement office in the sublevel of Building 21C, far from the sophisticated Cyber Operations Center where she had spent the previous 6 months. The room smelled of stale coffee and cleaning chemicals, and the only decoration was a faded motivational poster featuring a soaring eagle with the words, "Excellence in all we do," printed beneath it. A cruel irony given her current circumstances. Her new assignment consisted of entering routine maintenance reports into databases, updating software patches on low-priority systems, and monitoring basic network traffic for routine anomalies. It was mind-numbing work that required none of the advanced skills she had developed over years of intensive study and training. Each day felt like a slow death of her professional aspirations. But Sarah approached even these mundane tasks with the same methodical precision that had made her a top student at MIT. The isolation was perhaps worse than the work itself. Her former colleagues from the cyber operations team would nod politely when they passed her in the hallways, but the easy camaraderie she had begun to build with some of them had evaporated after Bradley's public humiliation. She ate lunch alone, worked alone, and returned to her barracks each evening feeling like a ghost haunting the base. But Sarah had never been one to accept defeat quietly. During her off hours, she continued working on her communication protocol, driven by a stubborn refusal to accept that her ideas were worthless. Using her personal laptop in the privacy of her barracks room, she refined the code, tested different encryption algorithms, and gradually built something that she believed could actually work. The protocol was designed to create a secure backup communication channel that could automatically activate if primary systems detected tampering or interference. The key innovation in Sarah's design was its adaptive nature. Rather than relying on fixed encryption keys that could potentially be compromised, her system generated new encryption protocols in real time based on multiple variables, including aircraft position, timestamps, and biometric data from authorized personnel. It was elegant, sophisticated, and according to Colonel Bradley, completely worthless. 3 weeks after her reassignment, Sarah was working late in her basement office, methodically entering network maintenance logs when her computer screen flickered. At first, she thought it might be a routine system glitch, the kind of minor technical hiccup that happened regularly in aging military IT infrastructure. But as she looked more closely at her monitor, she realized that something more serious was happening. The network monitoring systems were showing unusual activity patterns across multiple channels. Traffic that should have been routine was displaying irregularities that suggested potential interference or attempted intrusion. Sarah's pulse quickened as she recognized the signature patterns of a sophisticated cyber attack, the kind of coordinated assault that could compromise critical military communications. Following protocol, she immediately picked up her secure phone to report the anomaly to the Cyber Operations Center. But as she dialed the extension, her call went straight to a busy signal. She tried again, and then again, but couldn't get through to anyone in the Cyber Warfare Division.
Growing increasingly concerned, Sarah left her basement office and made her way up 2 flights of stairs to the main Cyber Operations Center. What she found there made her blood run cold. The normally bustling nerve center of the base's cyber defenses was in chaos. Officers were running between workstations, shouting instructions, and frantically typing commands into terminals that seemed to be responding sluggishly or not at all. "Rodriguez!" Sarah called out to the staff sergeant who had been kind to her after her humiliation. "What's happening?" Rodriguez looked up from his station, his face pale and stressed. "Ma'am, we're under attack. Someone's infiltrating our primary communication networks. They've already compromised 3 satellite uplinks and they're trying to get into the high-priority channels." Sarah's stomach dropped. High-priority channels was military speak for the communication systems used by Air Force One, Nuclear Command Authority, and other critical national security assets. If attackers gain control of those systems, they could potentially intercept classified communications, insert false information, or even disrupt command and control operations during a crisis. "Where's Colonel Bradley?" Sarah asked. "He's in the secure conference room with General Morrison," Rodriguez replied, gesturing toward a reinforced door at the far end of the operations center. "They're trying to coordinate response with Pentagon Cyber Command, but our primary communication links keep going down." As if to emphasize his point, several workstations around the room suddenly went dark, their screens displaying error messages indicating lost connectivity. The attackers weren't just infiltrating the network, they were systematically shutting down defensive capabilities, leaving the base's cyber warfare division increasingly blind and helpless. Sarah's mind raced as she processed what she was seeing. The attack patterns were sophisticated, suggesting nation-state level capabilities rather than ordinary hackers or criminal organizations. Whoever was doing this had extensive knowledge of military communication systems and had probably been planning this assault for months or even years. But there was something about the attack methodology that seemed familiar to Sarah. The way the intruders were moving through the network, the specific systems they were targeting first, the timing of their assault, it all matched scenarios she had modeled while developing her backup communication protocol. She had spent countless hours thinking about exactly how an adversary might try to compromise military communications, and she had designed her system specifically to defend against these kinds of attacks.
"Rodriguez," she said urgently, "I need you to listen to me carefully. I think I might have a way to help with this situation, but I need to get into the secure systems." Rodriguez looked at her with confusion and concern. "Ma'am, you know you don't have clearance for secure systems anymore. Colonel Bradley was very clear about your access restrictions." Sarah understood his position, but she also understood that the attack unfolding around them represented a potential national security catastrophe. "I know what Bradley said, but I've been working on something that might be able to counteract this intrusion. We're running out of time." The lights flickered overhead as another bank of workstations went offline. Somewhere in the chaos, an alarm began sounding, adding to the sense of urgency and desperation that filled the operations center. The secure conference room's soundproof walls couldn't completely contain the raised voices coming from within as Sarah and Rodriguez approached. Through the reinforced glass window, they could see Colonel Bradley gesturing frantically at a wall-mounted display showing the progression of the cyber attack across global military networks. General Morrison, a silver-haired man whose calm demeanor was legendary throughout the Air Force, stood with his arms crossed, listening to reports from Pentagon officials on the secure video conference system. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly to Sarah, "maybe this isn't the right time. If the colonel sees you here after what happened..." But Sarah was no longer thinking about her career prospects or Colonel Bradley's opinion of her abilities. The attack was escalating faster than anyone in the room seemed to realize, and she could see patterns in the network infiltration that others were missing. Her months of isolation and data entry work had given her an intimate familiarity with the base's network infrastructure that even senior cyber warfare officers lacked. "I can see what they're doing wrong," Sarah said, pointing toward the main display screen that showed the attack's progression. "They're trying to patch individual vulnerabilities as they're discovered, but this isn't a random assault. It's a coordinated attack designed to exploit the specific way our communication protocols hand off between different encryption systems." Rodriguez followed her gaze and saw what she meant.
The attackers weren't just trying to break into individual systems. They were targeting the transition points where secure communications switched between different protocols. It was an incredibly sophisticated approach that suggested detailed knowledge of military communication procedures. The handoff protocols, Sarah continued, her voice growing more urgent. They're the weak point. When a high-priority communication moves from one encryption system to another, there's a brief window where the data is vulnerable. These attackers have figured out how to exploit those windows. Just then, a new alarm sounded throughout the building, a different tone that made both Sarah and Rodriguez freeze. It was the alert for a national security priority communication emergency, the kind of alarm that indicated Air Force One or another critical asset was experiencing communication difficulties. "That's it," Sarah said, her decision made. "I'm going in there." Before Rodriguez could stop her, Sarah pushed open the heavy door to the secure conference room. The conversation inside stopped immediately as all eyes turned toward her. Colonel Bradley's face darkened with anger at the interruption. "Lieutenant Chen, you are not authorized to be in this room. Security, remove this officer immediately." But General Morrison raised his hand, stopping the security personnel who had started to move towards Sarah. "Wait," the general said, his sharp eyes studying Sarah's face. "You're the MIT graduate who's been working on communication protocols. What do you have to say about this situation?" Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she had perhaps 30 seconds to make her case before being forcibly removed from the room. "Sir, I believe I understand how this attack works, and I may have a solution. The intruders are exploiting handoff vulnerabilities in our communication protocols, the brief moments when encrypted data transitions between different systems. I've developed a backup protocol that could maintain secure communications even during these attacks." "General Morrison," Bradley interrupted, his voice tight with anger. "This officer's work has already been evaluated and found to be completely inadequate. Her code is unusable, and she's been reassigned to basic duties for good reason." But the general held up his hand again, silencing Bradley. On the main screen, they could all see that the attack was spreading to new systems every few minutes. Several critical communication nodes had gone completely dark, and reports were coming in that Air Force One, currently carrying the Secretary of Defense to a NATO summit, was experiencing intermittent communication failures. "How long would it take to implement your solution?" General Morrison asked Sarah. "If I can access the primary communication servers, I could have a working implementation online in less than 2 hours, but I would need full administrative access to the systems." Bradley looked like he was about to object again, but General Morrison cut him off. "Do it," the general ordered. "Colonel Bradley, give Lieutenant Chen whatever access she needs. If her solution works, we might be able to restore communications to Air Force One. If it doesn't work, we're no worse off than we are right now." The weight of the moment settled on Sarah's shoulders as she realized that her career, her reputation, and potentially national security now hung in the balance of the code she had written in the solitude of her barracks room.
Sarah's hands moved across the keyboard with practiced precision as she accessed the primary communication servers for the first time since her humiliation 3 weeks earlier. The familiar interface felt like greeting an old friend, but there was no time for nostalgia. Every second that passed meant Air Force One remained vulnerable, flying somewhere over the Atlantic with compromised communications while carrying one of the most important figures in the American defense establishment. The Cyber Operations Center had been transformed into a war room. Officers who had previously avoided her now watched intently as she worked, their skepticism mixed with desperate hope. General Morrison stood directly behind her chair, close enough that she could smell his coffee breath, while Colonel Bradley paced nearby like a caged animal, clearly torn between his desire to see her fail and his duty to restore critical communications. "Talk me through what you're doing, Lieutenant," General Morrison said quietly. Sarah kept typing as she explained. "First, I'm creating a secure partition within the existing network architecture. My protocol needs to run parallel to the current systems without interfering with any ongoing operations. Think of it like building a secret tunnel underneath a highway. The traffic above continues normally, while we create an alternative route."
On the main display screen, the attack continued to spread across military networks. The intruders had now compromised communication systems at 3 major military installations and were probing the defenses of others. Most concerning, they seemed to be specifically targeting the frequency bands and satellite uplinks used by high-priority aircraft like Air Force One. "The attackers are good," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez observed from his workstation. "They're not just randomly hitting systems, they know exactly what they're looking for." Sarah nodded as she initialized the first components of her protocol. "That's why conventional countermeasures aren't working. This isn't a typical cyber attack. It's more like a surgical strike designed to blind our most critical communication capabilities." Her fingers flew across the keyboard as lines of code scrolled down the screen. The protocol she had refined during her weeks of exile was complex, involving multiple layers of encryption that would generate new security keys based on constantly changing variables. But complexity also meant more opportunities for errors, and she was acutely aware that a single mistake could crash the entire system. "There," Sarah said, as the first module came online. "The adaptive encryption engine is running. Now I need to integrate it with the existing satellite communication protocols." This was the most dangerous part of the implementation. She had to modify the existing communication systems while they were still running, like performing surgery on a patient who couldn't be anesthetized. One wrong command could bring down the entire network, leaving not just Air Force One, but all military communications completely dark. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Colonel Bradley moved closer to the workstation, his expression tense with concern. "Lieutenant, are you certain about these modifications? If you crash the network now, we'll use all communication capabilities, not just the compromised ones." Sarah paused for a moment, her hands hovering over the keyboard. She could feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on her. 3 weeks ago, this same man had publicly declared her incompetent, had humiliated her in front of her peers, had relegated her to meaningless busy work. Now he was asking her to stake everything on her abilities. "Sir, I understand the risks," Sarah replied steadily, "but the current trajectory shows that the attackers will have complete control of our high-priority communication systems within the next hour anyway. We have to try something." General Morrison placed a hand on her shoulder. "Proceed, Lieutenant." Sarah took a deep breath and executed the integration command. For a terrifying moment, every screen in the operations center flickered, and she wondered if she had just made the most catastrophic mistake of her career. But then the system stabilized and new indicators began appearing on the monitoring displays. "Integration successful," she announced, allowing herself a small smile. "The adaptive encryption engine is running. Now I need to integrate it with the existing satellite communication protocols." Now she pulled up a map showing the aircraft's current position over the North Atlantic. Air Force One was approximately 2 hours out from London, maintaining radio silence due to the communication compromises, but still visible on radar tracking systems. "I'm going to attempt to establish contact using the new protocol," Sarah said. "If this works, we should be able to create a secure communication channel that the attackers can't intercept or disrupt." She opened a communication window and began typing commands to establish connection with Air Force One's communication systems. The process was delicate. She needed to authenticate her access while avoiding the compromised pathways that the attackers were monitoring. Minutes passed in tense silence as her protocol attempted to handshake with the aircraft systems. Sarah watched status indicators flash across her screen, each one representing a different stage of the connection process. If any of these steps failed, Air Force One would remain isolated and vulnerable. "Come on," she whispered under her breath, unconsciously echoing the thoughts of everyone in the room. Suddenly, a new window appeared on her screen. "Secure connection established. AF1 communications online." A cheer went up from several workstations around the operations center. Sarah felt a surge of relief and vindication unlike anything she had ever experienced. Her protocol was working! But her celebration was short-lived. Even as the secure channel to Air Force One stabilized, new alerts began appearing on the monitoring systems.
The attackers had detected the new communication pathway and were adapting their assault to target it specifically. "They're not giving up," Rodriguez called out from in station. "Whatever they're after, they really want to cut Air Force One off from command authority." Sarah's mind raced as she analyzed the new attack patterns. The persistence and sophistication suggested that this wasn't just a demonstration of capability. The attackers had a specific objective that required isolating Air Force One from secure communications. "General, I think this attack might be covering for something else. They're spending enormous resources trying to blind Air Force One specifically. That suggests they need the aircraft to be isolated for some reason."
General Morrison's expression grew increasingly grim as he processed the implications of the coordinated cyber and physical attack. He turned to address the entire operations center, his voice carrying the weight of command authority that had been earned through decades of military service. "Everyone, listen carefully," the general announced. "We are now treating this as a coordinated attack on critical national security assets. The timing of the cyber assault and the physical threat to Air Force One suggests a level of planning and resources that indicates state-level involvement." Sarah continued monitoring her communication systems while listening to the general's assessment. Her protocol was holding steady, but she could see that the attackers were probing for new vulnerabilities, even as they appeared to be withdrawing from some compromised systems. "The reduction in cyber attack intensity isn't because they're giving up," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "They're reallocating their resources. If they can succeed with the physical attack on Air Force One, they won't need to maintain the cyber assault." This realization sent a chill through everyone present. The attackers had clearly planned this operation with multiple phases. First, blind the communications networks, then attack the isolated aircraft, and finally withdraw before defensive forces could coordinate an effective response. "How long can you maintain communications with Air Force One?" General Morrison asked Sarah directly. Sarah studied her monitoring displays, calculating the strain on her adaptive protocol as it continued to counter jamming attempts and maintain secure channels across multiple networks. "The system is stable for now, but if they escalate their electronic warfare efforts, I might lose connection within the next 20 to 30 minutes. The timeline was terrifyingly short. Air Force One needed secure communications not just to coordinate its defense, but also to manage the broader implications of an attack on one of the most important symbols of American government. The Secretary of Defense aboard the aircraft would need to communicate with the Pentagon, the White House, and potentially international allies if this incident escalated to a broader conflict. "Sir," Rodriguez called out from his workstation, "I'm getting reports that the USS Gerald Ford has launched additional aircraft. It looks like we're going to have significant air support, but coordinating that many fighters will put enormous strain on Lieutenant Chen's protocol." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as she realized that her code was now the critical link holding together an international military response. Her adaptive protocol, originally designed to provide backup communications for routine operations, was now managing technical coordination for what could become an air battle involving multiple nations. Through her secure communication channel, she could hear the increasing urgency in the voices of Air Force One's crew as they prepared for what appeared to be an imminent confrontation with hostile aircraft. The Secretary of Defense's security detail was implementing emergency protocols, while the flight crew prepared for potential combat maneuvering that would test the limits of the massive aircraft's capabilities. As the crisis escalated from a communication emergency to an active military engagement, Sarah understood that the next few hours would determine not only the fate of everyone aboard Air Force One, but potentially the course of international relations for years to come. Her code had become the thread holding together a complex web of military cooperation, and if that thread broke, the consequences could be catastrophic. General Morrison's expression grew increasingly grave as he processed Sarah's observation. He moved to a secure terminal and began typing rapid commands, accessing intelligence reports that were classified far above Sarah's current security level. What he saw on his screen made him curse under his breath, a rare break in his usually professional demeanor. "Lieutenant Chen," the general said quietly, "I need you to maintain that secure channel at all costs. We have intelligence indicating that there may be a coordinated attack planned against the aircraft itself."
Sarah felt her blood turn cold. The implications were staggering. If hostile forces were attempting to isolate Air Force One from communications while simultaneously planning a physical attack on the aircraft, it could represent an assassination attempt against the Secretary of Defense, or worse, an act of war disguised as a terrorist incident. "Sir, what kind of attack?" she asked, her fingers continuing to work on strengthening the communication protocols, even as her mind reeled from the possibilities. General Morrison glanced around the room, carefully weighing how much classified information he could share in front of the assembled officers. "We've received fragmentary intelligence suggesting that hostile aircraft may be approaching Air Force One's flight path. The communication blackout could be intended to prevent the aircraft from requesting fighter escort or coordinating defensive maneuvers." Colonel Bradley, who had been listening intently to the conversation, stepped forward. "General, if that's accurate, we need to alert NORAD immediately and scramble fighter jets to intercept." But General Morrison shook his head grimly. "We've already tried. The same communication compromises that are affecting Air Force One are also disrupting our ability to coordinate with air defense commands. The attackers aren't just targeting one aircraft, they're trying to blind our entire air defense network." Sarah's protocol continued to maintain the secure channel to Air Force One, but she could see on her monitoring displays that the attackers were intensifying their efforts to break through her defenses. New intrusion attempts were hitting the system every few seconds, each one more sophisticated than the last. "There's something else," Sarah continued, studying the attack patterns more closely. "The timing of these intrusion attempts is too precise. They know exactly when our communication handoffs occur, which suggests they have detailed intelligence about our protocols." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez looked up from his workstation with alarm. "Ma'am, are you saying we might have a security breach at the operational level?" "I'm saying someone with intimate knowledge of our communication systems is helping coordinate this attack. The level of precision they're showing isn't possible without inside information." General Morrison's face darkened as he processed this possibility. A security breach within the military's cyber warfare division would be catastrophic under normal circumstances, but during an active attack on Air Force One, it could be fatal. "Colonel Bradley," the general ordered, "I want every person in this facility placed under immediate security review. No one enters or leaves this building until we've identified any potential compromised personnel." But even as security procedures were being implemented, Sarah's attention was focused on maintaining the communication channel that was Air Force One's only link to the outside world. Through her secure connection, she could hear the tension in the voices of the aircrew as they reported their status and requested guidance from ground authorities. "Air Force One to Peterson Base," came the voice of the aircraft's communication officer through Sarah's channel. "We are detecting unidentified aircraft approaching our position from the northeast. Request immediate guidance and potential escort assistance." Sarah felt her heart pounding as she realized the intelligence reports were being confirmed in real time. Hostile aircraft were indeed approaching Air Force One's position, and without her protocol, the most important military transport in the world would be flying blind into what could be a deadly trap. "General Morrison," she called out urgently, "Air Force One is reporting unidentified aircraft in their vicinity. We need to coordinate fighter escort immediately." But coordinating fighter escort required communication with multiple air defense commands, and most of those systems remain compromised by the ongoing cyber attack. Even with Sarah's protocol maintaining contact with Air Force One, they still couldn't effectively coordinate a protective response. "Can you expand your protocol to cover additional communication channels?" General Morrison asked. "If we could restore even partial communications with NORAD or European air defense commands, we might be able to scramble fighters from allied bases." Sarah studied her code architecture, calculating the resources required to extend her adaptive protocol to additional systems. It would be technically challenging and would require her to modify the encryption algorithms in real time while under active cyber attack. "I can try, but expanding the protocol will make it more vulnerable to attack. The more systems I try to protect, the more potential points of failure the attackers can exploit." "Do it anyway," General Morrison ordered. "We need to reestablish communication with Allied air defenses, whatever the risk." As Sarah began the complex process of expanding her protocol, new information appeared on the intelligence displays around the room. Satellite imagery was showing multiple aircraft approaching Air Force One's position from different directions, and their flight patterns suggested coordinated hostile intent rather than coincidental air traffic.
The next few minutes would determine whether Sarah's code could not only maintain communications, but potentially save lives in what was becoming an international incident with the potential to escalate into armed conflict.
Sarah's fingers moved across the keyboard with desperate precision as she worked to expand her communication protocol to cover European air defense networks. Every few seconds, her screens flashed with new intrusion attempts as the attackers intensified their efforts to break through her defenses. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the air conditioning in the operations center, and she could feel the weight of everyone's attention focused on her work. "Expansion protocol initializing," she announced, watching as lines of code scrolled rapidly across her display. "I'm attempting to establish secured channels with RAF Mildenhall and Ramstein Air Base. If I can get through to them, they might be able to scramble fighters to escort Air Force One." General Morrison stood behind her, speaking quietly into a secure phone with Pentagon officials who were monitoring the situation from Washington. The conversation was tense, with frequent references to DEFCON status and rules of engagement that made it clear the situation was escalating beyond a simple communication emergency. "Lieutenant," Colonel Bradley said, approaching her workstation with uncharacteristic urgency, "we're getting reports that the unidentified aircraft approaching Air Force One are military jets. They're not responding to standard identification requests, and their flight patterns suggest attack formations." Sarah's blood ran cold as she processed this information. Military aircraft conducting attack approaches against Air Force One represented an act of war, regardless of which nation was responsible. The stakes had just escalated from a cybersecurity incident to a potential international conflict. "How long until they reach Air Force One?" she asked while continuing to work on expanding her communication protocol. "Approximately 12 minutes at current speeds," Rodriguez called out from his tracking station, "and we still don't have positive identification on the aircraft type or origin." Sarah's expanded protocol was beginning to establish connections with European air defense networks, but the process was painfully slow. Each new connection required complex authentication procedures and encryption key exchanges, all while under constant attack from the cyber intruders who seemed determined to prevent any restoration of military communications. "Partial connection established with RAF Mildenhall," Sarah announced. "I'm uploading the current threat assessment and requesting immediate fighter scramble." On the main display screen, a new communication window appeared showing contact with British air defense officials. The response was immediate and alarming. RAF fighters were already airborne and vectoring toward Air Force One's position, having detected the unidentified aircraft on their own radar systems. "This is Squadron Leader Williams, RAF Typhoon Flight," came the crisp British accent through Sarah's communication channel. "We have visual contact with both friendly and hostile aircraft. American transport is maintaining course and altitude, but we count 4 unidentified fighters in attack formation approximately 8 miles out and closing." General Morrison grabbed a headset and joined the communication circuit. "General Morrison, this is General Morrison, United States Air Force. What is your assessment of the threat level?" "General, the unidentified aircraft are maintaining radio silence and ignoring all attempts at communication. Their approach profile is consistent with air-to-air engagement tactics. We are prepared to intercept and engage if necessary." Sarah felt her heart pounding as she realized her communication protocol was now facilitating what could become the first international air-to-air combat involving Air Force One in the aircraft's history. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming, not just for maintaining communications, but for being the potential link that prevented or enabled armed conflict. "Sarah," Rodriguez called out urgently, "I'm seeing massive spikes in the cyber attack intensity. It's like they know we've reestablished communications, and they're throwing everything they have at breaking through your defenses." Indeed, Sarah's monitoring displays were lighting up like Christmas trees with intrusion alerts. The attackers had apparently escalated their cyber assault to match the physical threat developing over the Atlantic. Her adaptive protocol was holding, but she could see stress fractures beginning to appear in the system architecture. "I don't know how much longer I can maintain all these connections," she admitted, her voice tight with stress. "The attacks are becoming more sophisticated, and I'm running out of computational resources to generate new encryption keys." Through her secure channel, they could hear the increasing tension in the voices of Air Force One's crew as they reported the approaching hostile aircraft. The Secretary of Defense's security detail was implementing emergency protocols, while the aircrew prepared for potential evasive maneuvers that would test the limits of the massive aircraft's capabilities. As the crisis escalated from a communication emergency to an active military engagement, Sarah understood that the next few hours would determine not only the fate of everyone aboard Air Force One, but potentially the course of international relations for years to come. Her code had become the thread holding together a complex web of military cooperation, and if that thread broke, the consequences could be catastrophic.
General Morrison's face went pale as he processed Sarah's observation about the timing of the cyber attack withdrawal. He immediately grabbed the secure communication headset and established direct contact with Air Force One's pilot. Air Force One, this is General Morrison at Peterson Base. We believe the hostile aircraft may be preparing for immediate engagement. Implement maximum evasive protocols and prepare for combat maneuvering. The response came through Sarah's communication channel with professional calm, despite the circumstances. Copy, Peterson Base. We are beginning evasive maneuvers and have activated all defensive systems. Request immediate support from any available friendly aircraft. Through the secure link, they could hear the massive engines of the presidential transport aircraft changing pitch as the pilot began aggressive maneuvering designed to make the aircraft a more difficult target. Air Force One, despite its size and ceremonial appearance, was equipped with sophisticated defensive systems and could perform surprising aerobatic maneuvers when necessary. Squadron Leader Williams to all stations, the British pilot's voice cut through the tension. We have positive visual identification on the hostile aircraft. They appear to be unmarked fighter jets, possibly modified civilian aircraft. We are moving to intercept and will engage if they do not break off their attack approach. Sarah's communication protocol was now handling critical military traffic from multiple nations as the situation escalated into active air combat. Her monitoring displays showed the strain on the system as encrypted communications flowed between Air Force One, the RAF fighters, and ground-based command authorities across 2 continents. But maintaining the communications was only part of the challenge. Sarah realized that her protocol wasn't providing more than just a communication channel. It was serving as the primary coordination system for an international military operation that was unfolding in real time over the Atlantic Ocean. I need to optimize the communication priorities, Sarah announced, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Right now, my system is treating all traffic equally, but we need to prioritize tactical communications between the aircraft. She began modifying her protocol in real time, creating priority channels that would ensure Air Force One and the RAF fighters could communicate without delay while relegating less critical traffic to secondary pathways. It was like performing brain surgery while running a marathon, technically complex work under extreme time pressure. Engaging hostile aircraft now, Squadron Leader Williams reported, his voice taking on the clipped, professional tone of a pilot in combat. Hostile 1 is breaking left, Hostile 2 maintaining approach vector toward the American transport. Through her communication link, they could hear the massive engines of the presidential transport aircraft changing pitch as the pilot began aggressive maneuvering designed to make the aircraft a more difficult target. Air Force One, despite its size and ceremonial appearance, was equipped with sophisticated defensive systems and could perform surprising aerobatic maneuvers when necessary. Peterson Base, this is Air Force One, came the voice of the presidential transport's pilot, slightly strained from the G-forces of aggressive maneuvering. We have successfully evaded the initial attack approach, but we're detecting additional hostile aircraft approaching from the south. Request updated threat assessment. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the situation was more complex than initially understood. The 4 aircraft that had first approached Air Force One were apparently just the opening wave of a larger coordinated attack. Her communication protocol was now coordinating defensive actions against what appeared to be a full-scale aerial assault. Rodriguez, pull up the satellite tracking data, General Morrison ordered. I want to know how many aircraft we're dealing with and where they came from. Rodriguez's fingers moved rapidly across his workstation as he accessed classified satellite surveillance systems. What appeared on his screen made everyone in the operations center stop and stare. Sir, satellite imagery shows at least 8 additional aircraft approaching the engagement area from multiple directions. They appear to be operating in coordinated formation and are maintaining radio silence. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a terrorist attack or an isolated incident. It was a coordinated military operation involving multiple aircraft and sophisticated planning. Someone with substantial resources and military capabilities was attempting to either capture or destroy Air Force One and everyone aboard. Squadron Leader Williams, General Morrison spoke into the communication headset, be advised that you are now facing a significantly larger hostile force. We're scrambling additional support, but you may need to consider withdrawing to preserve your aircraft. The British pilot's response was immediate and determined. Negative, General. We will maintain engagement and protect the American transport regardless of the odds. Request that you expedite any additional support you can provide. Sarah felt a surge of admiration for the RAF pilots who were risking their lives to protect an American aircraft, but she also realized that her communication protocol was now the only thing enabling this international cooperation. Without her system, the defenders would be operating blind and unable to coordinate their efforts effectively. As the air battle intensified, new challenges emerged for Sarah's communication system. The high-speed maneuvering of the aircraft was causing intermittent signal interruptions, and the electronic warfare systems on some of the attacking aircraft were attempting to jam communications. I'm seeing jamming attempts across multiple frequency bands, Sarah reported. The hostile aircraft are using sophisticated electronic warfare equipment. I need to adapt the protocol to counter their jamming efforts.
Sarah's adaptive communication protocol was being pushed beyond its design limits as the air battle over the Atlantic intensified. Her monitoring displays showed constant fluctuations as the system automatically shifted between frequencies and encryption methods to counter the increasingly sophisticated jamming attempts from the attacking aircraft. I'm losing signal strength intermittently, Sarah announced, her voice tight with concentration. The hostile aircraft have electronic warfare capabilities that are more advanced than I anticipated. They're not just trying to jam our communications, they're learning from our adaptive responses and evolving their countermeasures in real time. This revelation sent a chill through the operations center. Electronic warfare systems, capable of learning and adapting in real time, represented cutting-edge military technology that was possessed by only a handful of nations. The attackers weren't just well-equipped, they had access to some of the most advanced military systems in the world. Squadron Leader Williams to Peterson Base. The British pilot's voice came through with static interference. We've engaged 2 of the hostile aircraft, but 6 more are approaching the American transport from different vectors. We need immediate reinforcement or Air Force One will be overwhelmed. General Morrison was coordinating frantically with military commands across Europe and North America, but the same communication disruptions that had started this crisis were hampering efforts to scramble additional fighter aircraft. Most military communications were still compromised, leaving Sarah's protocol as the primary link between Air Force One and the outside world. Sarah, Rodriguez called out urgently, I'm detecting new aircraft approaching from the northeast. These appear to be friendly, possibly American fighters from the USS Gerald Ford. Sarah felt a surge of hope as she worked to establish communication with the approaching aircraft. If American naval fighters were entering the engagement, they might be able to turn the tide of the air battle. But first, she needed to integrate them into her communication network without compromising the security of the entire system. Establishing contact with Navy fighters, Sarah announced, opening new communication channels while simultaneously strengthening the encryption protecting Air Force One's position data. I'm uploading current tactical situation and threat assessment. The voice that came through her communication system was crisp and professional. Peterson Base, this is Commander Jackson, VFA 31 Tomcatters off the Gerald Ford. We have 12 Super Hornets inbound and are ready to engage hostile aircraft threatening Air Force One. General Morrison grabbed the headset with relief clearly visible on his face. General Morrison, this is General Morrison. Be advised that you are entering an active engagement zone with multiple hostile aircraft of unknown origin. Coordinate your approach with Squadron Leader Williams of the RAF. Sarah's protocol was now managing a complex three-way coordination between Air Force One, the RAF Typhoons, and the incoming Navy fighters. The technical challenges were enormous. She was essentially running an air traffic control system for an active combat zone using communication equipment that was never designed for such intensive real-time coordination. Air Force One, this is Commander Jackson. The Navy pilot's voice came through clearly. We have visual contact with your aircraft and the engagement zone. Recommend you continue current evasive manner while we establish air superiority. Through her communication link, she could hear the tension in the voice of Air Force One's pilot as he reported the aircraft status. Copy, Commander. We are maintaining evasive maneuvers, but fuel is becoming a concern. We may need to consider an emergency landing if this engagement continues much longer. The fuel situation added a new dimension of urgency to the crisis. Air Force One couldn't maintain high-speed evasive maneuvers indefinitely, and finding a secure landing location while under attack would be extremely challenging. Sarah realized that her communication protocol might need to coordinate not just an air bottle, but also an emergency landing operation. I'm detecting communication attempts from the hostile aircraft, Sarah announced suddenly, studying new signals appearing on her monitoring displays. They're trying to establish contact on standard aviation frequencies. General Morrison looked puzzled. Hostile aircraft attempting communication? That's unusual behavior for an attacking force. Sarah isolated the incoming communication signal and routed it through her secure protocol so it could be monitored safely. What they heard surprised everyone in the operations center. American aircraft, this is Colonel Viktor Petrov of the Russian Air Force. You have violated our airspace during a military training exercise. Land immediately at the designated coordinates or we will be forced to engage. The room fell silent as the implications of the statement sank in. If the attacking aircraft were Russian military jets, and if they were claiming that Air Force One had violated Russian airspace, then this incident could escalate from an attack to an international diplomatic crisis, with the potential for global conflict. General, Sarah said quietly, I need to check the aircraft's navigation data. If there's any possibility that Air Force One is off course. General Morrison nodded grimly. Do it. But also maintain our defensive posture. Legitimate training exercise or not, those aircraft were approaching in attack formation without identifying themselves. Sarah quickly accessed Air Force One's navigation systems through her secure communication link. What she found was deeply troubling. According to the aircraft's GPS systems, they were exactly where they were supposed to be, following their filed flight plan over international waters. But according to the Russian aircraft, they were in violation of sovereign airspace. Navigation shows Air Force One is in international airspace, Sarah reported. Either the Russian aircraft are lying about the location or someone has been manipulating our GPS data. The possibility of GPS manipulation added another layer of complexity to the crisis. If hostile forces can manipulate navigation systems, they could potentially force aircraft into international incidents or guide them into trap situations.
Sarah's discovery about the potentially manipulated GPS data sent shockwaves through the operations center. If someone had the capability to alter navigation systems on Air Force One, it represented a level of cyber warfare sophistication that challenged everything they thought they knew about secure military communications. I need to cross-reference the aircraft's position with multiple independent sources, Sarah announced, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed satellite tracking data, radar information, and astronomical navigation systems. If the GPS has been compromised, we need to determine the aircraft's actual location. General Morrison was speaking rapidly into multiple secure phones, coordinating with the Pentagon, State Department, and NATO command authorities. The possibility that this incident was the result of GPS manipulation rather than genuine airspace violation had diplomatic implications that extended far beyond the immediate military crisis. Sarah, I'm seeing something strange in the communication intercepts, Rodriguez called out from his workstation. The electronic signatures from the Russian aircraft don't match known Russian military communication systems. The encryption protocols they're using are more advanced than anything in the Russian inventory.
Sarah paused in her navigation analysis to examine Rodriguez's findings. He was right. The electronic systems being used by the allegedly Russian aircraft were using encryption methods that were more sophisticated than standard military protocols. More concerning, the electronic signatures were nearly identical to the patterns she had observed during the initial cyber attack on military communications. These aren't Russian aircraft, Sarah said with growing certainty. The communication signatures match the cyber attack patterns we've been fighting all day. Someone is using false flag aircraft to create an international incident. The implications were staggering. If hostile forces were using unmarked aircraft with false Russian communications to attack Air Force One, they were attempting to create a situation that could lead to conflict between the United States and Russia. The cyber attack on military communications had been designed to prevent American forces from coordinating an effective response, leaving Air Force One vulnerable to what would appear to be a Russian attack. General Morrison, Sarah said urgently, I need to establish direct communication with the actual Russian military command. If we can confirm that these aircraft aren't Russian, we might be able to prevent an international incident. General Morrison looked skeptical. Lieutenant, establishing communication with Russian military command during an active engagement could be interpreted as an act of desperation or could compromise our tactical position. But Sarah was already working on the problem, using her adaptive protocol to reach out through diplomatic communication channels that were separate from military networks. Her system was designed to be flexible, and she was pushing it to its absolute limits to establish contact with Russian authorities through embassy communication links. I've got a connection to the Russian embassy in Washington. I'm requesting immediate contact with their military attaché. Minutes passed in tense silence as Sarah worked to establish the diplomatic communication link while simultaneously maintaining the tactical coordination for the ongoing air battle. Her protocol was now managing communications for active combat operations, diplomatic negotiations, and technical coordination across multiple time zones and security classifications. This is Colonel Mikhail Volkov, Russian military attaché, came a new voice through Sarah's communication system, speaking accented but clear English. We understand there is an incident involving American and allegedly Russian aircraft over the Atlantic. General Morrison took the communication headset. Colonel Volkov, this is General Morrison, United States Air Force. We have American aircraft under attack by aircraft claiming to be Russian military conducting training exercises. Can you confirm the location and identity of any Russian aircraft in the area? The response was immediate and concerning. General Morrison, we have no Russian military aircraft operating in that area. All Russian Air Force training exercises today are being conducted over the Baltic Sea, more than 1,000 kilometers from your reported position. The confirmation that the attacking aircraft were not actually Russian sent another wave of alarm through the operations center. If these were false flag aircraft, then someone was going to extraordinary lengths to create an international incident that could destabilize relations between major world powers. Colonel Volkov, Sarah interjected, are you able to establish communication with the aircraft claiming to be Russian? We've recorded their communications and can provide the frequencies they're using. We will attempt contact immediately, Volkov replied. If these aircraft are impersonating Russian military forces, this represents a serious threat to international security. As Sarah facilitated the communication between Russian and American military authorities, the air battle continued to rage over the Atlantic. The Navy fighters from the USS Gerald Ford had engaged several of the hostile aircraft, but new threats continued to appear on radar screens. Commander Jackson to Peterson Base, came the voice of the Navy squadron leader. We've identified the hostile aircraft as modified civilian jets equipped with military weapon systems. They appear to be operating under false transponder codes and are using jamming systems to mask their true identities. This revelation provided crucial intelligence about the nature of the attack. The use of modified civilian jets suggested a non-state actor with significant resources and technical capabilities. Such an operation would require extensive planning, advanced equipment, and access to military-grade weapons systems. Sarah, General Morrison said, I need you to document everything. All communication intercepts, technical analysis, and coordination records. This incident is going to require extensive investigation, and your communication protocol may be the only complete record of what actually happened.
Sarah nodded, realizing that her system had inadvertently become the primary evidence collection system for what was shaping up to be one of the most complex international security incidents in recent history.
The coordinated response between American and Russian authorities, facilitated through Sarah's adaptive communication protocol, began to turn the tide of the crisis. Colonel Volkov had successfully established contact with Russian air defense networks, confirming that no legitimate Russian aircraft were operating in the engagement zone, and that the attacking aircraft were indeed using false identification codes. "This is Squadron Leader Williams," the British pilot's voice came through with renewed determination. "We've received confirmation that the hostile aircraft are not legitimate Russian forces. We are now authorized to engage with full military response." The authorization to treat the attacking aircraft as hostile rather than potentially legitimate military forces changed the entire dynamic of the air battle. The RAF Typhoons and Navy Super Hornets could now coordinate offensive operations without the diplomatic constraints that had been limiting their response. Sarah's communication protocol was managing the tactical coordination as friendly forces moved from defensive maneuvering to coordinated attack operations. Her system automatically prioritized targeting data, threat assessments, and tactical communications to ensure that all friendly aircraft could operate with maximum effectiveness. "Commander Jackson to all aircraft," the Navy squadron leader's voice cut through the tactical chatter. "We are implementing attack pattern Delta. Squadron Leader Williams, recommend you maintain high cover while we engage the primary threats." Through her secure communication link, Sarah could hear the intensity of the air combat as multiple aircraft engaged in high-speed maneuvering and weapons deployment. Her protocol was handling real-time tactical data that included missile targeting information, aircraft status reports, and damage assessments. Air Force One to Peterson Base came the welcome voice of the presidential transports pilot. "Hostile aircraft are breaking off their attack and withdrawing to the northeast. We are resuming normal flight operations and requesting escort to the nearest secure airfield." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized that the immediate threat to Air Force One had passed. Her communication protocol had successfully coordinated the defensive operations that had protected the aircraft and everyone aboard. But even as the tactical situation stabilized, she knew that the larger implications of the incident were just beginning to unfold. "General Morrison," Sarah said, "I'm detecting additional communication traffic from the withdrawing aircraft. They're transmitting on encrypted frequencies that don't match any known military or civilian systems." She isolated the communication signals and began analyzing their technical characteristics. What she found was deeply troubling. The encryption methods being used were nearly identical to those employed during the initial cyber attack on military communications, confirming the connection between the electronic and physical aspects of the assault. "These are the same people who launched the cyber attack," Sarah announced with certainty. "The communication signatures are identical. This was a coordinated operation designed to isolate Air Force One electronically before attacking it physically." General Morrison was already coordinating with intelligence agencies to track the withdrawing aircraft and investigate their origin. Sarah's intercepts and technical analysis would provide crucial evidence for determining who was responsible for the attack and how they had acquired such sophisticated capabilities. "Lieutenant Chen," the general said, turning to face her directly, "I want you to know that your actions today have prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life and a major international incident. Your communication protocol didn't just work, it may have prevented a war." The praise felt surreal to Sarah after weeks of humiliation and professional exile. Just hours earlier, she had been relegated to data entry and basic maintenance tasks. Now she was being credited with preventing an international crisis through the same code that had been declared worthless and dangerous. "There's something else, General," Sarah said. "Studying the final communication intercepts from the attacking aircraft, I think I can trace the source of their electronic warfare capabilities. The encryption algorithms they were using contain signature patterns that might lead us back to whoever developed their systems. This intelligence breakthrough could provide crucial information for preventing future attacks and identifying the organization responsible for the assault on Air Force One." Sarah's adaptive protocol had not only defended against the attack, but had also collected evidence that could lead to the perpetrators.
General Morrison, Sarah said, addressing Sarah's former supervisor, I believe we owe Lieutenant Chen an apology and a significant reassignment. Her work today has proven that her communication protocol represents a major advancement in military cybersecurity. Colonel Bradley approached Sarah's workstation, his expression showing a mixture of embarrassment and grudging respect. Lieutenant, I was wrong about your capabilities and your code. Your work today was exceptional, and I formally apologize for my previous assessment. Sarah nodded while accepting the apology while focusing on the larger implications of what had happened. The attack on Air Force One had revealed serious vulnerabilities in military communication systems, but it had also demonstrated the potential for innovative solutions to address those vulnerabilities. General, Sarah said, I'd like to recommend that we implement my adaptive protocol across all high-priority military communications. Today's attack showed that our current systems are vulnerable to sophisticated cyber warfare, but they also showed that adaptive encryption can provide effective defense. As the immediate crisis concluded and Air Force One safely reached its destination under fighter escort, Sarah realized that her professional exile was over. The humiliation she had endured at Building 21C had led to the development of technology that saved lives and prevented international conflict. Her code had diverted not just communications, but the entire course of her career and potentially the course of history itself.
3 weeks after the Air Force One incident, Sarah stood once again in Building 21C, but this time the atmosphere was dramatically different. The same fluorescent lights cast their harsh glow across the Cyber Operations Center, but instead of facing humiliation, she was addressing a room full of senior military officials, intelligence analysts, and cybersecurity experts who had come to understand the revolutionary nature of her adaptive communication protocol. Ladies and gentlemen, General Morrison announced to the assembled group, Lieutenant Chen's communication system not only prevented a potential international incident, but has fundamentally changed how we approach military cybersecurity. Her adaptive encryption protocols have been successfully implemented across multiple critical communication networks, and early results show a 97% improvement in resistance to sophisticated cyber attacks. Sarah stood at the front of the room where, just months earlier, Colonel Bradley had publicly humiliated her and declared her work worthless. Now she was presenting her technology to a joint committee of Pentagon officials, intelligence analysts, and cybersecurity experts who were eager to understand and potentially adopt her innovations. The key breakthrough, Sarah explained, gesturing toward the complex diagrams displayed on the main screen, was recognizing that traditional encryption systems are vulnerable precisely because they follow predictable patterns. My adaptive protocol generates new encryption keys based on multiple real-time variables that attackers cannot predict or control. In the weeks following the Air Force One crisis, Sarah's protocol had been extensively tested and validated by the military's most sophisticated cybersecurity teams. Not only had it proven effective against known attack methods, but it had also successfully defended against new types of assaults that had been developed specifically to challenge her system. Colonel Bradley, who had been reassigned to a desk position pending investigation into his handling of Sarah's original work, was notably absent from the presentation. The investigation had revealed that his rejection of Sarah's protocol had been based on incomplete testing and personal bias rather than technical merit. His career in cyber operations was effectively over. The applications extend far beyond military communications. This adaptive encryption technology could protect everything from critical infrastructure systems to financial networks to private communications. We're looking at a fundamental advancement in digital security. But perhaps more important than the technical achievements was what the incident had revealed about the nature of threats facing military communications. The investigation into the Air Force One attack had uncovered a sophisticated international network of cybercriminals and state actors who had been developing coordinated electronic and physical attack capabilities. The attackers weren't just trying to isolate Air Force One, Sarah explained to the committee. Analysis of their communication patterns suggests they were testing our response capabilities as part of a larger intelligence gathering operation. The physical attack was secondary to their primary goal of mapping our cyber defense networks.
This revelation had prompted a comprehensive review of military cybersecurity protocols and had led to Sarah being appointed as the lead developer for next-generation military communication systems. At 26 years old, she was now responsible for protecting some of the most critical communication networks in the world. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had supported Sarah during her darkest professional moments, was now serving as her chief technical assistant. He approached her workstation with a tablet displaying the latest test results from their expanded protocol implementations. Ma'am, the European tests are showing even better results than we expected. The NATO communication networks protected by your protocol have successfully defended against 3 separate attempted intrusions this week alone. Sarah smiled, remembering the days when Rodriguez was one of the few people willing to acknowledge her existence after her humiliation. His loyalty and technical expertise had been crucial in developing and implementing the expanded protocol systems. There's something else, Rodriguez continued quietly. We've received a request from the White House. They want to implement your protocol for presidential communications, including Air Force One's primary systems. The irony was profound. The same aircraft that her protocol had saved during the crisis would now be permanently protected by the technology that had once been declared worthless and dangerous. Sarah's code would become an integral part of the most secure communication systems in the world. General Morrison approached her with a folder containing official military documents. Lieutenant Chen, I have here your promotion orders. Congratulations, Captain Chen. Your new assignment is as Director of Adaptive Cybersecurity Systems for the Air Force Cyber Command. The promotion represented not just personal vindication, but recognition that her work had created an entirely new field within military cybersecurity. She would be responsible for developing adaptive defense systems that could protect against threats that hadn't even been imagined yet. Thank you, General, Sarah said, accepting the promotion documents with a mixture of pride and determination. I want to ensure that what happened during the Air Force One incident never happens again. Our military communications should be protected by systems that can adapt and evolve as quickly as the threats we face. As the presentation concluded and the assembled officials dispersed to implement Sarah's protocols across their respective networks, Sarah remained in the operations center, looking at the same workstations where she had once been told she wasn't good enough for military cyber operations. The basement office, where she had spent weeks in professional exile, had been converted into a high-security development laboratory where her team was working on even more advanced communication protection systems. The windowless room that had once felt like a prison had become the birthplace of revolutionary cybersecurity technology. Sarah's journey from humiliation to vindication had taken only a few months, but it had fundamentally changed not only her career, but the entire approach to military cybersecurity. Her code had indeed diverted Air Force One to escort her, not to a different location, but to a completely different future where her innovations would protect critical communications for years to come. The fluorescent lights of Building 21C still cast their harsh shadows, but now they illuminated the work of teams of cybersecurity experts who were implementing Sarah's adaptive protocols across global military networks. Her moment of humiliation had become the foundation for a revolution in digital defense technology that would protect military communications well into the future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.